My next guests are working to rebuild Minneapolis businesses and support their communities in an effective and equitable way. R.T. Rybak, he's a cool dude. He's the president and CEO of the Minneapolis Foundation, which has established the Restore, Rebuild, and Reimagine Fund to help renew key cultural corridors across the Twin Cities. He's also a former mayor of Minneapolis. We're lucky to have him. Henry Jimenez is the executive director of the Latino Economic Development Center, or let me get this right, LEDC. LEDC is a community development financial institution that equips Latino entrepreneurs with skills and financial tools they need to be successful. And as we just heard from the mayor now, Kenya McKnight-Ahad is the founder and CEO of Black Women's Wealth Alliance, a small business which focuses on advancing economic stability and prosperity for Black women entrepreneurs and workers. It's great to be with all of you. Kenya, I'm going to just ask you real quick, and everyone, we're going to kind of work around the room here, and you guys all can respond to each other. But the mayor said the most important thing for him as he was approaching, the needs in Minneapolis, the needs for small business, particularly businesses owned by people of color that had not always been basically given the same opportunities as a lot of other businesses. And he said the most important thing is to listen and to build with other folks. Is the mayor listening to all of you?
He is listening. He's got a lot of listening to do from a whole bunch of ears. But I say from the business community, the mayor's been a great partner in understanding the priorities that we've set out. I work in a coalition with Henry, with the mayor, to set priorities for entrepreneurs of color around owning real estate, around being supported in their recovery efforts, to not only purchase land, but to rebuild land, to remodel their spaces, to get technical support from legal to accounting, et cetera. And the mayor has put forth a proposal to the city council to finance the priorities that our coalition laid out.
Well, thank you. Henry, let me ask you, when it comes to Latino-owned businesses and just businesses, in general, your area has been, faced with so many different challenges within such a condensed period of time, that I want to kind of give our audience a while. We've got great graphics behind us, and I'm an enthusiastic guy. The terrain is a tough one for a lot of businesses. What do they most need? What are you finding if you're going to go change the circumstances? We talk about it sometimes too casually, but what do businesses out there, particularly minority-owned businesses, really need to function so that they don't need as much and they're in a much healthier vector?
Thank you, Steve. I also want to answer that the mayor is listening, and so is the governor, and the Senator Pratt legislature is listening. Our communities have been listening much longer, though, and they've been talking to these legislators and mayors and governors across the country for as long as we all have been here. So I just want to make sure that that is stated. I also want to say that what a Latino business needs, it's the same thing as any other business needs are. Everybody needs access to capital and technical assistance and the support both of the community but of their government. And how can they make sure that they establish a strong business plan and execute it? Those needs are the same. However, we all know that there's been systemic barriers that has made it difficult for the very same type of ideas for a Latino entrepreneur to potentially access the same type of capital at a traditional institution.
Well, thank you. RT, I know you've been working for a long time with the foundation and others across many different, I hate to call them lines in communities, but there are lines, there are, different quadrants there. You're a melting pot guy. I know there's this video out there that the Star Tribune pointed to, and you made a comment that said there, features several entrepreneurs who come from, immigrants into the community. And I guess my question is, and I don't know how to frame this exactly right, but I know you've raised money, you're addressing these issues. I just want to know, is gravity taking us in the right direction? And we don't need your foundation, we don't need all the money and support you're doing, or is it a tough lift? Like, what's the gap in terms of getting a community on the right track and a healthy track that's inclusive, that's respectful, where civic and social justice are built in, and that's what you're trying to coax along? Or is that just a hard thing to do that's going to require a lot more attention, a lot more support, and a lot more resources? Does that make sense?
Gravity implies that a lift is needed, and sure there is, but I also think that one of the things to remember is to remove barriers. A barrier-free world, one without the barriers that have kept people from succeeding as much as they deserve to be, is also part of the goal. So, I grew up in a family, my dad was white, ran a drugstore in a neighborhood where we depended on Black customers and Black doctors bringing their prescriptions into our drugstore next to an African-American grocery store. Over time, that neighborhood right near Lake Street became one that had many more businesses. That succeeded because we removed some barriers. That included the idea which building owners rented to whom, our 2% loan program at the city. Later on, when we had lots of people from the Islamic community, primarily Somalis, opening business, we restructured loans to be fit, prevented them. This incredible collection home ownership gap, and that's certainly what small businesses use for equity and moving forward with that. So what we need right now is to remove barriers, and because of what's happened in the community, we needed, for instance, the public to do much more rebuilding for the destruction. Only 40% of it was covered by the didn't designate a single dollar specifically to help those businesses of color destroyed after George Floyd's murder. We're going to access those dollars, but I think it's painful. And our foundation is money just out in loans. Businesses, they have great right now, and we need to be more in grants right now.
Well, thank you for that, Mayor Rybak. And I think we've heard most of it. I think there's a couple of internet issues but I think mostly we got this. But let me ask you a question, Kenya. I've been looking at your Twitter feed.
Is it my coverage? Should I move?
No, you're great. You're just. I just want to mention our audience with, and we got most of it. Kenya, I've been looking at your Twitter feed, and you just announced that you folks have a new piece of real estate, a new building that you've come into, that you put various Black-owned businesses in it, and you're really trying to change the vector. And I'm interested in this dynamic of what do you think when it comes to the Black Women's Wealth Alliance, when it comes to small business, when it comes to community? What is the process of getting businesses on their feet so that but then also taking that step and selling what inclusion matters so that you get mutual support from other communities, so that we're not just doing each other's laundry and that we are in fact seeing mutual growth and mutual concern in a community, and that you put wealth and wealth creation in some part of the middle of that?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. For us, it's complex, right? Because we're dealing with a very historical context that is different than every community here. And so we have to do more deep investment in the financial trauma that Black folks have experienced from this country and continue to. So for us, it is not just about the business, it's about the person that's operating the business. It's a holistic approach. And so it's about stabilizing the individual in order to stabilize the business, right? So we're talking about making sure folks have enough money to pay their bills, enough money to take care of a good quality of life for themselves and their families before we can even get to really focusing on the business stability. And with the business, we have to think about strategy, helping us realign or just align our business to market opportunities because we're typically locked out of the bigger markets. So we tend to do business with ourselves, which doesn't sell as much. And so we need, support to access broad retail and other markets. And so, developing our products in that way, our branding. And so there's a lot of grant support needed at that level. It isn't just education. It isn't just the technical support, but there's a whole conversion process that's needed from, helping us transition from being sole proprietors to actual employers, where we're actually working for our own companies and able to hire folks and provide them with salary opportunities so that people can have stable income to actually build on a foundation to begin wealth, understanding that their business is also a wealth tool. But the first number one thing, again, going back, is really stabilizing the individual. And that is something that we know. It's something we do in our work. We see the impact of that. And when the person is stable, then what they do has more stability to it.
Well, thank you. Henry and RT, all of you actually, but I'll start with Henry. I am interested in the extraordinary level of unreported innovation that's going on at the smallest level of ventures. There's a lot going on out there that is not on the radar screen. When we talk about small businesses, we're talking about small businesses at a certain level, but there's a lot of things that are going on online. There are new, ways in which people have pivoted in this crisis to come along. And a lot of that story is a good story that I think has not been told. But I'm just interested, what I find when I talk to these folks is that there are sometimes financing challenges. There are, just how to do it challenges, or who challenges, or figuring out regulatory frameworks within a community or city. Does the LEDC and does the Minneapolis Foundation, which has resources, are they out there with mentors? Are they out there helping to provide? Because it's not just giving businesses money, it's giving businesses, models to replicate. And I'm just wondering how much of that we should be talking about. Henry?
Yeah, well, I want to make sure that your viewers know that when you're an immigrant, Latino entrepreneur, you already have to be innovative to try to navigate systems that don't work for you. So there's already a natural innovation happening there. I do want to thank the Minneapolis Foundation, Wells Fargo, because they provided funding for LEDC to just say, hey, we know it's an emergency mode, so we know that you're working with folks. Just do what you need to do to support these Latino entrepreneurs. And at a time of emergency, I don't think that we had the opportunity to be told, this is exactly how you're supposed to do it. Just let the folks that already know how to do this do it. And I feel like the Latino entrepreneurs, not just here in the Lake Street corridor, but in the state, we're having to figure out, okay, how do I keep my business solvent? How do I make sure that I follow guidelines, but still be able to open and be sustainable to feed my family? And so I would say that innovation has been happening before the pandemic. And I think that is why it's so important to invest. And I don't like when government says, oh, we're going to give small businesses grants or forgivable loans. We should be talking about investing in our community. We're investing when we provide a $10,000 grant. That's an investment on a community that's clearly growing in the state of Minnesota. So I think these investments are important for a time where folks are being the most innovative because they're being allowed to be. And if I can add a little bit more, this is the perfect time for state and federal government to really rethink their processes. I think people are listening, but the systems are still the same. The budgetary systems are still the same. Rethink procurement process, rethink the HR process, because that is how you're going to start really tapping into these innovative new wave of Minnesotans. And many, by the way, we should also stop calling new Minnesotans, because I could tell you that my daughter and my son, they know nothing but Minnesota. They are Minnesotanos, and that is where we need to invest.
That's very cool.
And if I can just add,
please,
because I know RT wants to jump in, is that, I would say that we're seeing an insurge of new business startups in the Black community. Black women have already been leading new business startups across the country. And Black entrepreneurs across the country has really, we created more businesses under the pandemic than we have in the past 20 years. And so we just increased that again. And so I think the innovation continues as, you all know historically that we've been innovative the whole time in creating a lot of the infrastructure of this country. So this has continued and we've seen it. What we haven't seen, though, is a lot of emphasis supporting Black businesses specifically. We know there's resources directed, but it's not hitting us. We're not seeing a lot of resources in our community that's getting to the entrepreneurs. We're seeing a lot of education, a lot of mentor, but we're not seeing direct resources that get to the people on the ground. And we need to see more of that. And we do need more opportunities to, reform policies, processes, structure. Like the roof has to come off of everything for sure at this point.
Kenya, before I jump, I'm going to give Art. I apologize. I'm going to give RT the last word in a moment, but I want to ask you one other quick question, Kenya. I know that I've read that your PPP experience and whatnot was a good one, and part of that was a relationship with your financiers, with your bank, that had been part of that equation. My equation is, I think there are a lot of other people you're talking about that may not have those same kind of relationships, may not have those kind of habits.
Correct.
And so I'm always interested, not the boutique story. I want to know the story that can be copied and replicated by other people that are coming along, as you just said. So just real short form, are you helping other people to understand how to do what you did?
it takes resources. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm an exception, but I'm not the rule, right? I've worked in community for 20 years. I've had access to a lot of information and knowledge and people that the average person doesn't. So I understand and know how to navigate and work with folks, and that worked to my favor. And I worked in business before I was an entrepreneur and doing this work. And so that isn't available to everyone, but it does take a level of resource to help convert, as I converted from a sole proprietor to now an employer where I work for the company and hire other people. So that level of resource investing in systems really matters to help make that access key. But we're working on that in our work, but it needs to be something that folks specifically focus on when they're talking about micro business, sole proprietors. That conversion is critical.
Thank you. RT, I'm going to give you the last word. You can respond to any of this, but when I was in Minneapolis in the past and you and I spoke, one of the things that struck me about your work in the foundation and what you're trying to do is to impact people's consciousness so that there's empathy, so there's mutual concern, so that there's concern about how others are growing and doing. We have that in our program today, but I want to ask you, I know the real world is more complex than that. Do you think, particularly in a place like Minneapolis, that we're getting to a point where not only with what you're trying to do with building capacity and providing resources, are you seeing a shift so that citizens in this area are themselves committed to diversity and inclusion, are committed to kind of, social justice being embedded in economic? I mean, that may be a heavy question, but I know that you think about those things.
I think our city has been through a heck of a lot over the year and a half, but I also believe we are moving toward a place in spite of and because of this panel. Okay, when I was mayor, both Henry and Kenya advised the city, and that helped a lot. Now the tables are turned. I lead a 103-year-old foundation that was built on really well-intentioned white power, looking to ways to give money to help people of color with a rigid theory of here's what we think is going to work. If you agree, we'll give you money. Very different now. Step number one is I brought in a person who was much more proximate, Shonda Smith Baker, to lead our impact. I follow her lead, and we follow the lead of Kenya and Henry. We don't say, if you do things the way we think, we'll give you. We say, tell us how to address these issues, maybe different perspectives have, and then we will ideally support that. We're doing a build street from the one Kenya built in partnership with the Charles Phillips Family Foundation, which is a foundation representative. Thing is, foundations created a building that's 100% about Black-owned businesses and creating equity. So the ownership of the building will turn over to the contractor, developer, to key tenants and investors. All the businesses will be Black-owned in that, and that's part of one thing. In addition, along with the innovation that both Henry and Kenya are doing, we work with a very established group, Greater MSP, representing all the CEOs, that has created a way to open up their supply chains and now $1 billion to small businesses. And that's focusing now even more on emerging businesses of color. That sort of work about breaking down barriers of foundations, about business organizations, is not about figuring out how do we lift up groups that have been innovating within their own cultures for generations. It's how to really create an equitable place where people can succeed. The natural order is for everyone to succeed. What's happened in our country is we're recognizing barriers were put up. The owners, the contractor on that building, talked about families from Tulsa. They lost property in the destruction of Black Wall Street. 3 generations later, in Minneapolis, on Broadway Avenue, they will be restoring equity that they should have had all along. That's removing a barrier. That's not swooping white saviors and saying, hey, we have a great idea to lift you up to where we are. We're creating something new here. I don't know where the heck it's going to land, but it's a lot better than we're restoring and we're rebuilding, but we are reimagining.
Well, RT, I really appreciate the scaffolding and framing you brought to the thing. It's so important. RT Rybak, CEO of the Minneapolis Foundation, former mayor of Minneapolis, Henry Jimenez, executive director of Latino Economic Development Center in Minneapolis, and Kenya McKnight-Ahad, so cool to talk to you, founder of the Black Women's Wealth Alliance, Health and Wealth together. Thank you both, all three of you, for joining us today. Outstanding conversation, and good luck with all of your great work.
Thank you.
Well, that brings us to the end of our program today. A big thank you to Wells Fargo for its support of this program, and to all of you in the audience for joining us. For those of you who missed any of the conversations this afternoon, we're going to put these great conversations up on our website shortly, and you can go back and rewatch them, which I'm going to do as well. I'm Steve Clemons. Be well.